sometimes I'm behind on time, but I'm gonna say good morning. I had to make sure it was still morning, you guys. It's already been a long day mentally, but I'm welcoming you all to this session. We are excited to have you all join us today. We are still have a lot of loaded information to share with you all, and we are more than honored to introduce you to our next panelist. And as I said earlier, I do indeed apologize for the delay. I have to pull off my glasses to see, of course. We're excited for this next upcoming session of Mississippi Farm to School. Our next presenters is Chastity and Nicole. They are with, I know the last other name was the design, but my God, was it Phlox Design? I believe I'm right. If not, I'm mispronouncing it. You all have to forgive me for that. But you get me on video and then everything else just seems to go out of whack. But I'm going to give it up to Phlox Design, which is with Chastity and Nicole. I can't remember the last names because my screen is gone.
That's all right. That's fine. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So we want to give an introduction of ourselves first, and then we will share our screen, and we have a slideshow to share with you guys. I'll start with me. Mm-hmm. I am Chastity McGee. I started farming, organic vegetable farming in 2015, and before that, I was going to college to obtain my bachelor's in horticulture. It's been a beautiful journey gardening and farming in Mississippi. And this is how I met my partner and best friend. We were both working on a local vegetable farm here in Tupelo, Mississippi. And we hit it off right at the beginning. We had an interest in improving the earth of where we were and currently still are. And this is us. So here's Nicole. I'll let her introduce herself.
Thank you, Jess. I just wanted to thank everyone also for joining. We're really excited to share what we've been experimenting on and playing with. And so as we go through the presentation also, if you want to ask any questions, just put it in, just submit them via the Q&A chat, and then we'll get them at the end. Anyway, so as Chas said, we met at a organic farm, and that was in 2017 when I moved to Mississippi. I'm originally trained as a visual artist, and that's where we are coming to you from, is from our shop here in right next to my house. And so we met on a farm, and Chas had an incredible idea to bring gardens to Mississippi that people can eat from and grow native plants. And we basically haven't stopped since then.
Not stopped.
So we've been experimenting on everything from growing mushrooms, growing vegetables, learning about native plants, and also learning what sustainable and regenerative means in physical form, in growing practice. And I think that we hear these terms a lot right now.
What do they mean?
What do they mean? So what we are gonna share basically what we have found that they mean. And so I am going to kick this off to Chas after I do a little share screen and a little present. Oops. Hey.
Wonderful.
Cool. Oops. Sorry. And I'm going to bump it back. Sorry. Okay. Boom. That's us.
Okay.
So Chas, take it away.
Okay. So we are Phlox Design. Throughout the presentation, we'll have pictures to the left-hand side to showcase some of the native plants that we're working with. There's a lot, and there's so many benefits to growing them. For now, I'm going to start with our mission statement. Our mission statement is to empower and encourage communities to grow regenerative ecosystems in partnership and harmony with the environment. We are here to encourage and work harmoniously with our environment. Can you move that down?
Yeah, sorry, y'all. We're also learning technology at the same time. I'm gonna try that. Okay,
perfect. How we do this. Our designs emphasize edible, native, and non-invasive adapted plants in closed loop systems. What is a closed loop system? It's farming practices that recycle all nutrients and organic matter back to the soil that it grew in. This enables the sustainability of each space to be easier to maintain and delicious to play in. Oh, thanks. That's it. Yeah. So a couple of ways of how we're taking this into physical reality is we are currently designing a community garden in downtown Tupelo. This is a photo of it. We have built and installed raised beds that are accessible to wheelchairs and anyone with back problems. So gardening can be fun for everyone, and even us too. Sometimes we want to stand up and play with the plants. We've also installed this in the earth garden as well, and we will be expanding this spring as there was great success and failures in a garden. It's all about learning, right? A couple of other things that we're doing right now, other projects we've got going. Growing mushrooms, as Nicole mentioned earlier. We want to bring very nutrient dense food in all means to people. We feel like that is a human right. We do garden consultation visits with clients. We attend farmers markets with a readiness to share information, to sell native plants and organic vegetables. We collaborate with a restaurant here in Tupelo, which is so big. And we have designed them an organic garden as of last spring, and that contract is still going on this year. So wonderful to grow food surrounded by concrete. It's so nice. Those are really good. Yeah, continue. So what is sustainable and regenerative gardening? Sustainable, pertaining to a system that maintains its own viability by using techniques that allow for continual reuse. Regenerative gardening is a collaboration of creation, that applies principles and practices that increase biodiversity, enriches soils, improves watersheds, and enhances ecosystem services. How is sustainable different from regenerative? We feel the issue with sustainable systems is that they take and give back only what they wish to take back again. These sustainable systems may lessen the agrochemicals, pollution, fossil fuels, and human rights abuse, but it doesn't halt them. Whereas in a regenerative system, it creates room for new. It gives back more than it takes. A mindset of creation that leaves the humans, resources, insects, birds, microorganisms, the inhabitants of Earth, the whole, better off it restores. What does this look like? Well, here we'll mainly discuss in detail one example, but there's a lot of ways to think about it. The main question, that we're constantly asking ourselves, and I encourage you to as well when designing, is, does this system I'm creating mimic the natural world? You know, our soil has been depleted through traditional agriculture practices, tilling, carbon mining, the use of chemicals and salt-based fertilizers. Regenerative agriculture aims to reverse these negative effects. It's a holistic land management style. Living soil helps sequester carbon. That's something, that's a take home. I really like that. So these are examples of the gardening techniques of regenerative gardening. Mulching your garden beds with biodegradable material that can feed the soil as it decomposes. This can look like wood chips or sheet mulching, cardboard that breaks down and feeds the soil. Ideally, you don't want to leave a patch of earth uncovered. It's kind of like tucking in the microorganisms each night. You're giving them warmth. They're a place to live. Composting garden waste to take full responsibility for the waste we create and to reuse it as microbial food for the next season. Yes, super simple ways to compost your garden waste. And I mean, it's going to break down, so why not turn it into soil for your next garden? Switching from tilling techniques to no-till gardening, such as compost mulching, as we talked about, cover cropping, and silage tarping. Tilling, why is tilling bad? We'll just cover that for a moment. It's a great way to prep a garden bed, but it has many negative effects. One of the main issues is that tilling degrades the structural integrity of the soil, and therefore it reduces the ability to retain water. Less water in the soil, less microorganisms in the soil, and more erosion. And tilling releases carbon into our atmosphere. So I'm gonna skip over and show you a picture of silage tarping. And this right here, this is our expansion that we are working on for the spring in this community garden. We have laid out pieces of plastic to kill off grass. So basically, like when the weather warms up, it will cook the grass and will expose the earth. And then we will build the soil through our compost. And yeah, grow a lot of food there. So like, yeah, silage tarping is a good alternative way to no tilling. You know, sometimes we think we need to till a plot of earth to kind of mix in that grass and like to expose the earth, but really we can just, you know, kill off the grass, the lawns that we've been manicuring for some time, and there's our soil. It worked. Cover cropping. One of the best ways to naturally and safely infuse the soil with rich nutrients. We're growing the soil, and thus we're growing nutrient-dense food in the soil. Saving seed at the end of your harvest. It's a full circle process. This is something Nicole and I have really been focusing on before the pandemic, and especially because of the pandemic, is just saving our seed. You know, our seed companies that we purchase seed from, there's a lot of stress in the seed companies right now, and like a lot of varieties of seeds you just can't get because there's just been such a like urgency put on these companies. So building resilience in our community by collecting our own seed, and you know, if the plant's been grown in our environment, it's more adapted to our weather, and the pest here. Yeah, a lot of benefits. Benefits. Lowers the requirement of outside materials, which lowers cost and unnecessary labor. It creates an ecosystem that may require your participation to begin with, but will need less and less input from you as years proceed. So, you know, your mulch, for instance, your mulch will break down and turn into organic matter, which may require less nutrients to be amended to the soil each season. The soil will start to balance and maintain its own health. You will need less amendments, as I said. You lower your garden's carbon footprint by bringing in and taking out less material and by growing your own food. So here's a very easy thing that everyone can do to take responsibility of their kitchen waste, and it's vermicomposting, or better known as worm castings or worm poop. It improves the soil immensely, and as I said, it helps with leftover kitchen scraps. There's a lot of kitchen waste and restaurant waste, so much potential here. So as you see in this picture, it's just a plastic tote with holes drilled into the top to allow air exchange. Cardboard, newspaper, shredded paper, coffee grounds. Worms love coffee grounds, and lots of worms in here. The benefits are it's a pathogen suppressor. It gives phosphorus and nitrogen to plants. It helps with water retention. It restores microbial organisms, staves off pest pressure. So something to think about. If it's like a very thriving soil microclimate for the plant, these pests are not going to try to attack in that area. So yeah, it staves off the pest pressure because you're adding all the things that a plant needs. Higher yields and increased plant growth. One moment. So why do we grow native plants? We put a lot of native plants in our designs, and we like to create habitats for them. So they provide pollen, nectar, and seeds for our native butterflies, insects, and other animals. They are vital players in this thing we call Earth. Less pesticides. We don't use any pesticides as we choose to grow organic, but definitely less are needed with native plants. These plants have adapted to our region. Little and sometimes no fertilizer is needed for them to thrive. Less mowing, which helps with air pollution and noise pollution. Clean air, anyone? Provide shelter and food for wildlife. Unfortunately, there are very few benefits to a native wildlife from a manicured lawn. Grow food, not lawns. I am currently converting 9/10 of an acre lawn into a food jungle. So if I can do it, I know everyone can do it too, and we're here to help. Less water. It takes less water for native plants. Soil, baby. We are losing topsoil every day to concrete, industrial agriculture, chemical pesticides, conventional lawns, and global warming. When you bring native plants back home, they have an intimate relationship with the native soil and all of its life forms. This creates balanced soils with high biodiversity. Why we choose organic. This is a beautiful shiitake mushroom grown organically. It promotes life. We don't use harmful chemicals to produce our food, which makes our bodies, minds, and planet healthier. Healthier produce, it tastes better. It tastes so much better. Growing soil. The crops are allowed to mature on the plant, which enriches its flavor profile. You leave a tomato on a tomato plant, until it's red and ripe. It's incredible at the depth of flavor that's in there. Our produce is grown locally, which helps our carbon footprint. Most of our food in Mississippi is imported in. We have so much land available to grow food. And this helps our economy. This helps our local businesses to become more resilient. We rely on each other and get to know each other. More resistant to pest and disease. It helps maintain soil biodiversity. Yeah, and so that's the knowledge on my part. Now I'm going to give it over to Nicole to show the process of designing.
Thanks, Jess.
Yeah.
All right. So all of that information of what we're trying to do with regeneration is going to put into practice with this project assessment. So this first slide is just kind of like our basic skeleton of what we do when we first come to a site, when we're first talking to the people involved, kind of breaking it down for you. So a good way, if y'all are starting a new garden, this could really help, hopefully. So the first thing we think about is the human connection, who we're talking to, who's the garden for, and who will be involved. The initial goals, what are the first set of goals for the space? These obviously flex and change as seasons go on. Available resources. This is how we assess our budget as well as our local resources and our available labor inputs. Site assessment, full location evaluation. Okay, so let's go over that human connection, which is obviously like one of the core aspects of how we design a garden, right? So this is for the people, but also for the earth. So what we got to keep in mind is who is it for? Who's involved? Who's going to be maintaining the space? Who's going to be weeding? How do they need the space to be set up so they can weed and irrigate efficiently? Who's eating from that space? What do they need from that food? Do we need healing herbs? Do we need more vegetables, more greens? Do we need those vegetables to be easy to grow? Maybe we need a specific flavor to entice their creativity to keep growing. And then who will be a guest in that space and how will they experience it? Like for that restaurant garden Chas was talking about, you know, the guest isn't going to harvest from that space, but how do we design a garden that's aesthetically pleasing for them, right? It's a public space, so aesthetics matter. And then what are the initial goals, right? So is the space being used for education, meditation, native habitat, food supplementation, all of these things, some of these things? We have to keep that in mind as we design the space. Is there an intended harvest state we're trying to reach? What kind of yield are we looking to gain? And obviously, like initial goals, as I said before, always flex. The first year of a garden can always be well, not always, but can be that's the most challenging times, the first few years of a garden. You know, you're learning so much, but there's a lot of failure involved, which enables that learning. So those goals change, and also like setting up realistic goals for the communities we're working with. Is this garden to be installed enough to naturalize? And by that, you know, I mean, maybe we're going to use some perennial vegetables or perennial native plants, right? So just some intentions to think about how the space is going to grow over time. And then are there any specific plants or elements that the client wants to include? You know, if we're setting up a garden for a restaurant, do we want to get some herbs that they maybe can't acquire from their local food source? We can grow it for them. Okay, so the available resources. I think this is really important. You know, obviously there's a monetary budget, right? However much we need to make that money stretch for a season, a garden installation, or a whole year. Obviously we need to consider that. But how do we stretch that? By looking at what we have in our physical spaces already. Do we have some leftover wood that we can build a compost bin with? Do we have leaves that have fallen in the fall that we can rake together and start to compost. And then what resources do we have locally at our disposal? Here in Tupelo, we have a city mulch and compost program that you can just drive up and fill your truck with. So, those things are great to keep in mind because they're going to stretch the dollar, and they're also going to broaden the community for whatever project it is for the gardening project. These are some examples of how we've stretched resources, right? So these are 2 examples of different composting styles. We used leftover wood for the example on the left, and we built a 3-bin compost. And then even in the front there are some plastic pots that were given to the garden that we grew a lot of okra in. And on the right here, that's my personal experiment with a cylindrical composting system. I had chicken wire lying around and a broken PVC pipe, drilled some holes in that and just put it down the center so the aeration comes straight through that center tube. And you just fill up that chicken wire, and the tarp closes it in to keep some heat in. But then once it's gotten really hot, if I want to bring more air in, I just take the tarp off, and that's all just chicken wire, so the air can come from the outside as well. Okay, so site assessment. So this is when we're talking about like the physical aspect of the new garden space. Land. What kind of soil do we have? Clay, sand, loamy soil. What's our pH? How acidic is that soil? A lot of vegetables need a very specific pH. Native plants can stretch a little bit more, but every plant really needs a specific pH. So it's good to know that from the get-go. And then also you can also test in your soils how much nitrogen, potassium, and potash is in it. So really simple tests that you can get even just from Lowe's that can test a lot of these things for you. And you can also get testing for an affordable price through the county. I think it's like maybe just like $5, $10 that you can send your soil sample in. Then we want to look at, is the earth sloping? My personal garden, one half of that garden holds water. So I'm building up my garden beds into mounds so that the water can fall off and my plants don't drown. What are the access points for bringing in materials, right? So gardening is labor intensive. How can we think about our design to reduce the labor? Let's think of efficiency, right? Because we want to make this enjoyable. We want people to get addicted to gardening, to being in the earth. So that's one way to do it, is really making things make sense of how we're going to bring in material that we need to bring in. Then we got to look at the light, right? This is an obvious one. We got to know which way our sun is rising and setting in relation to the garden and how much light we're going to get on that plot. And also, we're going to look at our existing buildings around us and what kind of shade they're providing and what kind of wind barriers are they creating. Some for good reasons, and sometimes that's a bad thing, because sometimes you want wind to help with your pollination. And then we've got water. So what's the existing water source to hook up irrigation or hoses? Is there one? Do we have to set up a rainwater catchment system? Do we need to hook up a 200-foot hose to get to the garden? Those are things, very practical things we got to think about. And that also will connect to our human connection, right? Who's watering the garden? And do we need to set up a drip irrigation system with a timer so they don't have to even like think about watering? It's all done for them. You know, some of these things they work great. You know, those are great tools. And then also, what kind of drainage do we have in our soil? Very important. And what is the annual yearly rainfall for this location? So right now we're just gardening here in Mississippi, but if you were to leave, you know, there's just different annual rainfalls to consider. And also you have to consider how the rain changes through the season, right? So, you know, up here, it's when you hit July and August, somebody's got to be watering that garden because you're going to hit some droughts. So something to always keep in mind as the seasons change. So after we've done that, then Chas and I leave the site, we come together and we start our design process. And so this is like just an example of how we like to present for our clients, just like kind of a color story, right? Like what's going to be in bloom? Like what are you expecting to find, just to kind of spark some creativity and excitement. So for design time, we break it down into 3 different categories. We have our plant and fungi selection, our accessibility, and our aesthetics. Choosing our plant allies. So first thing, we've talked to our humans, our collaborators. So now we got to think, based off what they want, what are the best plants for the conditions and the maintenance that's going to happen for this space, right? And then we think about what are the companion plants that will help for our primary plants to thrive. And this can be our example of the 3 sisters planting, right? If they want beans, well, we can also give them possibly corn and squash in the same bed, right? The beans can grow up the corn, the squash can be your ground cover, and you get 3 times as much food. It also can be a great example of planting marigolds or sweet alyssum next to your tomatoes to try to fend off pests, or plant native plants to bring in pollinators. So everything's working in tandem with each other. And then we also consider, of these options, we always try to make sure we don't bring in invasive plants. We do a lot of research on that, and we try to always use native plants first. What native plants will attract the pollinators we need to help us grow food? You got to have those flowers in that garden. You got to have them. I had a rough year in my garden last year, and those flowers did more than bring pollinators. They brought me just like a beautiful spark of happiness when, my squash didn't pan out as I had planned, but I had these beautiful marigolds that were going off. And, sometimes that's really, morale is very important. All right. So accessibility is our second thing that we try to consider. What is the garden bed that's most accessible for the people involved? Physically, mentally, emotionally, all of those things need to be covered, right? What style of garden is best to engage, to learn in? If you're in a school or you have children at home and you're trying to teach, what is best for everyone there? Is it easier to teach in a raised bed that's off the ground? Or is it easier for everyone to be in the dirt together on the earth? Those are things to consider. And then also with that, the pathways in between each garden bed make a difference. If you have a larger pathway, you have a little bit less growing space. So that's not a bad thing. It's just something to consider. But, if you have a larger pathway, maybe you can fit a crowd of people or children around your garden bed that you can learn around and teach. What is the most efficient way for us to bring materials in and out of the garden? That's another part and aspect of making your pathways wide enough to fit your wheelbarrow in, so you can bring in your compost and, you can make everything more accessible. We want to bring in ease the whole way through. And so these are some raised beds that Chas had shown you before. And these are both way more ergonomic for our standing bodies. Sometimes it's really comfortable to crouch on the earth, but it's also wheelchair accessible. So, okay, so then after those considerations, we've picked plants, we've written down aspects we want to tailor the design for. We move into aesthetics. It's the last thing. And I just put this here because I want to stress that while aesthetics are important, it's the function and the regeneration of a garden, the sustainability of a garden, that is the most important. It would be really unfortunate if you gathered a whole group of people together and put in this beautiful garden and you had one season of beautiful flowers and vegetables, and you made it harder for yourself the next season. So it's always, aesthetics do come last, but it doesn't mean that things can't be beautiful and pleasing. So when we think about our design, we think about our colors, and that includes all aspects of a plant's life. So how big is it going to be when it's in and out of bloom? How it's going to look in the wintertime, you know, like a blueberry bush, right? A blueberry bush is going to be green in the summer, and then the leaves will turn to this reddish color in the wintertime. You're going to have the blueberries on there, and then maybe you got to net that blueberry bush from the birds. What color is the net? You know, like you can get really finicky if you want with your aesthetics. What are the plant's dimensions all throughout the growth cycle? This is really important. For the plant's health, you need to have the proper spacing, right? To give it enough room to not be shaded out by another plant. But you also need to remember that a carrot needs at least 12 inches of loamy soil to grow out and be a nice, beautiful carrot. So you need to think about its roots. You need to think about, is this plant like mint, right? Gonna spread everywhere? Does it roam across the soil? Does it grow down? Does it grow up? All of those things need to be considered. And then you compare plants up together to make for interesting dimensions, right? You can set your plants up higher in the back and work down in a cascade, all of these things. And then what are the aesthetic values of the materials already present, and how do we bring in new materials that work cohesively with them? So thinking about this, are there already wooden raised beds on the site? Maybe we should continue with wooden raised beds going forward to keep the aesthetics the same, if that's like of a high priority. I think when it's a public space, it usually is, right? Sometimes it's not. And, you know, sometimes there's already a rock barrier, a stone barrier in a tan color. Well, if I have to bring in like an edging, maybe I should choose a color edging that'll go well with those rocks. Like very small details, but when they all come together in a garden, they all play a part. All these little colors and little details come and play a part. So that's our design. This is a previous project that we did for a storefront farm stand. And this is just like a really quick before and after. And this we just did this past summer. And we removed all those rocks from that space, and it was just growing some grasses and weeds, and we planted, that whole plot has native perennial plants. I think there's probably only maybe a few herbs that aren't native plants in that garden. You can see that on the right. And that is the first year. So that plan for that garden is those grasses. There are some sea oats in there that look lovely in the fall, and echinacea, and they're just going to fill out over time. So I just wanted to share a couple projects. And so this is for our restaurant garden. You'll see here on the left, that's what one portion of it looked like. And we pulled up those grasses, and on the right, that's what it looked like this fall, you know, just a full bounty, and they harvested all through winter on this garden. And I will also say, it's surrounded by a parking lot. So it is literally a little like strip in between a parking lot. And it's amazing how well it can do. We did add worm castings to the site, and that definitely helped. We like to bring in as much nutrition, but always like to pay homage to the worms because they do a lot of work for us. I just wanted to end with this quote here from our website, just speaking about kind of the state of things. There is a dire need for gardens of all sizes and shapes, green spaces with practical functions alongside aesthetics. Our goal is to co-create holistic environments that will please the eye, the palate, and all of nature's creatures that may wander upon the scene. So Thank you guys so much for listening. I hope that this inspires everyone to play in the earth. Even if you don't grow anything, go get your hands out in that dirt. It is therapeutic. If you guys need any any plant related advice or needs of any kind, please feel free to reach out to us. We've included this information at the bottom here. And yeah, so spring is coming up and we'd love to meet with everyone. And I am going to stop the share and come back. If there are any questions that y'all have for us, we would love to hear them.
Before we get to other questions, I want to say to Nicole and Tess, you guys are awesome. Shall I say, as the young people say, you rock.
You do too. Thank you so much.
As I listened to your all's presentation, it was just a joy. And that is my vision. And my vision is to see things like what you all are doing multiply across the state of Mississippi.
Yes,
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And I thought about our home gardens for school-age children, just as a thought. Just imagine a child starting off there and end up where you all are.
Mm-hmm.
It's a win-win regardless of where we are. And the first question, I know Chastity, you started off in, was it permaculture? As your
Horticulture.
Horticulture, okay. And what inspired you to do this? Was this part of your thoughts in the beginning that this is where you saw yourself being, or what stirred you in that direction?
That's a good question. So, honestly, I went through a big health crisis at age 24. And I was introduced to clean eating then. So I was kind of sparked in the organic farming direction through clean eating. And I just decided, well, I'm going to devote, this has really helped me physically, mentally, and emotionally. I'm going to devote my energy into growing and learning more about this. And so, I started going to college for this. It completely changed my major. And I devoted every bit of my energy to learning how to produce the food that I need each and every day, how to produce it for myself. And then once I, came to Mississippi from East Tennessee, and I really learned how to grow a lot of food, more than what I could eat, I said, okay, how can I get this to the people? And that's, shortly after I met Nicole, and she and I would really just sit together on our off times from the farm and just talk of plants. And I just kept taking notes mentally of we both enjoy this so much. And it has to work for the humans, has to be harmonious for everyone to work. And yeah, I did not, to answer the other question, I did not see it coming this way, but it actually makes sense now that it did. When you devote your entire focus to something, it's just going to continue to grow.
Open it up to questions.
Okay.
I'm not sure if we have any in our chat box, which is not really part of my.
Oh, okay. I see the questions on the side here.
Okay. Yeah, I got it.
Okay.
You're right.
So we'll just read off the questions and answer.
Can you talk more about this idea of a food jungle? Ooh.
Yeah. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with a food forest, but in permaculture, it's a really heavily used term. And the idea is you can grab food anywhere you're standing in this plot of land. So it's like a food forest. There's food everywhere, and there's food in bloom at all different times of the year. So I am so grateful of this piece of land that I'm on now. And it is, like I said, it's 9/10 of an acre, and it was just all manicured land. Beautiful, beautiful. But that lawn is only serving the purpose of the lawnmower to come every other week to maintain. And, like that's good real estate to be growing the food that my daughter and I eat, or, like our friends in our community can eat. And, I moved into this piece of land, and I don't know many of the neighbors, but I don't know. I have some food. Would you like to eat some food? And maybe we could like create this wonderful bond between each other and exchange knowledge. So yeah, it's a food. I foresee it as a food jungle. It's going to be food everywhere. I'm expanding with a lot of like perennial vegetables that Nicole and I find along the way, and native plants. It's a food jungle for humans and creatures, yeah. Which we are creatures.
We've been discussing the benefits of gardening in beds versus gardening in the soil. So I guess I'll take that as just like a comparison. So gardening in beds, in some ways, they can be built to what you need, right? So in some ways they can be a little bit easier if you have a bed and you can either dig up your soil or make your compost or buy your soil, if that's the resource that you have. Then maybe you don't have plastic silage tarps or a tiller, or maybe you don't have the physical time to rip up the earth and create beds. I think it's a preference more than necessarily. Mm-hmm. I think both have pros and cons. Yeah, for sure. I think that the earth is a beautiful space, even if you can just make a little bit of time to really plant in the earth, because I think from a spiritual perspective, I think that there's a lot that putting your hands on the earth has to offer. It's been my personal therapy, and not that can't happen in a raised garden bed, but I guess for me, it's like the energetic connection of what's happening. I mean, that soil isn't an object. That soil is a living ecosystem. We know less about the soil than we know about the oceans and space. We know nothing. Scientists are just learning so much, and so to get some of your hands and your feet or in your body onto that earth, I always urge people to. But honestly, raised beds are a beautiful way to do it too.
Yeah, I think that's great. I want to add this too, that this came to mind as you were talking, is so you think about the earth has a very big surface area. So if I was going to have a plot 20 by 40, right? In that 20 by 40 space, there's so much biodiversity there. So you could have really harmful pathogens or pests that live there, but you also, with those harmful pests, you have beneficial pests there too. And so you have a lot more biodiversity. The more diversified a system is, we say this all the time, the better off we are, right? Whereas you can create that as well in the raised bed garden. And the benefits of raised bed gardening to me is you're most of the time working with sterile materials, like your peat. The soil you bring in doesn't have grass seed in there. So that is such a gift. You don't have to worry with grass as much. And you can bring in over time these microorganisms that will help the immunity of your plants in your bed there. Cool. Yeah.
Okay, so let's see. We've also been discussing confidence in the garden and in cooking, how to encourage people to keep their spirits up when things may not be going as planned. I had a really rough year in my garden. Like I said, the flowers were really an unexpected benefit. I have a garden that I co-create with other people. We live on the same property, and my friend was more like, let's put these flowers in, let's test these flowers, and she's looking to start a flower farm. And I'm like, yeah, the flowers are great. They're good for the pollinators. That's great. That's great. But we got to put the kale in. We got to get we got to get these vegetables growing. And I had a lot of failure in the vegetables this year. And the flowers just kept my spirits up. And I think that when I said earlier, the first year of a garden is the hardest, it's what I've heard other people tell me. And it's what I've also found. It depends on what state your soil is into, but like that's another reason why you design a space to be right for your level of work. If you put a ton of work into something and it doesn't pan out completely, take it easy on yourself. Like we all, it's a learning process. It's not like you're working with an object. This is a co-creation. You're working with, like I said, like all kinds of organisms. You're working with the bunny rabbits that are interested in your kale. You're interested you're working with some pests, with some bees. You're working, like, everybody's involved. Like, you are just one little iota in this system. So just thank the bees and the plants for growing, and same thing with cooking, right? Like my dad and my brother are chefs, and I don't possess their skills. But just take it one baby step at a time. Start with where you're comfortable. Maybe, maybe start with, maybe it's not your year to grow a really hard variety of tomatoes. Maybe we start with something like collard greens and okra that really love to grow anywhere. Sunflowers like to grow anywhere. Start with something hardy,
Yeah, I think that's it for me too. Like, yeah, start with what you know, and know that there will be failures for there to be successes. They go hand in hand, and at the end of the day, what we're all in it for is to grow and learn. So like, if you learn that you put this plant, which I did last year, is I put a lot of tomato plants in a spot that became very wet, and the plants basically drowned in all this water. I was like, well, it was a lot of energy seeding and potting up those tomatoes and fertilizing and staking the tomatoes. However, I have the wisdom now that tomatoes will not grow there. So I think it's just like starting with practice. What you know, and just look at it as experience. You're gaining experience. No one became a smooth sailor no one became a skilled sailor on smooth seas. You gotta have some riffs in there. Yeah. And with cooking, I feel like cooking, it's just so beautiful because I'm getting new cookbooks all the time. There's a asparagus to zucchini cookbook that I love to just always go back to whenever I have a vegetable that's in season. I look up that exact vegetable, and that cookbook gives you so many different recipes to cook with it. And just look at cooking as like an addition, or like gardening is an addition. It adds, it's an extension. It adds flavor to our life.
When planting native plants, do you put them in a separate area, or do you put them more as companions for food crops like you would with marigold or alyssum?
That's a great question. When planting native plants, do you put them in a separate area? No, I think there probably are some desired spacing for each native plant, right? So just as there is like a pepper plant. For instance, a pepper plant needs 18 inches per plant. So you wouldn't want to put a native plant right on top of a pepper plant. So we do mind the spacing requirements of each plant. And also we mind the fertility requirements for each plant. So I think a good technique on deciding the placement of plants, first of all, it's an experiment. Like you can say, I'm going to try this out, but before trying it out, maybe do a research on this native plant enjoys this pH of soil, and it likes this much nitrogen, whereas this vegetable likes this, and this, and it'll kind of give you a roadmap of to what goes where. But yeah, you can absolutely put the native plants with your annual vegetables. I like doing that at home, and Nicole does that at home too. It brings in the pollinators, and
yeah, I think that I think mixing is a great recipe for success,
Yeah, and the marigold and alyssum, yeah. So we do put the marigolds near our tomato plants, and also another good plant to plant with tomatoes is borage. It has a star flower, blue star flower. I think you can get white as well. And this helped me so much in my garden this year. I didn't see any hornworms. So I have it all over. I have it planned all over for my garden to come, but I didn't see any hornworms. And the season before, my plants were just eaten away with huge, incredible hornworms. They're so beautiful, but they will demolish a plant. So yes, definitely research the plant, see the benefits of the plant, see
where it's usually grown,
Yeah.
Simple things. Pay attention to what kind of sun it likes, what kind of water it likes, and then you can pair it with other plants or put it in that area.
A lot of notes taking. Yeah. You're gonna mess up, but look, the thing is to just do it, just to do something and keep it going, and know that you're doing a great job.
Yeah,
you're always doing a great job. It's just what we want to do with that. You're doing good. You got it going.
I will say too, it could be good to plant them on the perimeter. If you that's another nice thing to do is if you have say you have a square garden space and your main intention is to grow food, but you want to include some natives, maybe put them on your perimeter or your flowers on your perimeter, because then they'll do their work out there too, and you're not really adding as much. Maybe you have to bring in more fertile amendments to your soil to grow your vegetables, but your natives are tougher. So instead of putting them in those fertile beds that you could be growing food, you can put them on the perimeter where natives, they want to grow want to grow here, hence the name. They're from here. They want to grow in whatever soil they can get right here. So and then I guess the last question is, have you found any plants or seeds that you struggle with growing in your area?
So many.
You want to take that one
Sure.
first, and I'll think about some?
Sure. Any plants or seeds that you struggle with growing in your area? So I love growing vegetables. So I'll start with vegetables first. I personally have a really hard time growing watermelons. I know that seems like common knowledge around Mississippi, but I haven't had good response with watermelons. However, I try every year. My technique that I'm going to try this year is I'm going to mound the earth more so around the vine instead of just having a permanent bed that I put the watermelons in. That's one that sticks out. I didn't have good luck with my pumpkins either. However, the cantaloupes came really well. Artichokes, that was a new endeavor this past year.
Yeah.
So artichokes wanted to be covered. No, I'm sorry. They wanted to be watered 4 times every day during a drought, which was a lot of labor, and I wasn't prepared for that. So I have, out of 6 artichokes, I have 1 remaining, and I'm really grateful of that one. So,
yeah.
But yeah, there's been a lot of successes with, kale does really good here. We have such an amazing growing season, and I think that's maybe not common knowledge, but we have such a wide growing season. We have a spring season, summer season, and fall season. And we've been experimenting last year with winter growing with frost protection. And we're still eating fresh produce right now. Yeah. So it's really good. Yeah. What about you?
I don't like growing tomatoes. I just don't. I think
they're very labor intensive.
They need too much care, and I just go to Chaz's house and get her tomatoes. So I don't like to grow tomatoes. They just need a lot of care. But I was just gonna see, do we have time for these last two? I found two more questions. Do we have time, and should we wrap it up?
So the session was supposed to end at 12:15, but we have a long break for lunch. I think it's fine to go ahead and answer these last two questions.
Okay,
Awesome.
Cool.
But feel free to sign off if you need to.
Cool. Where do you keep the composting worms? Are they part of the garden? I would love to answer that part of the story on this. So the composting worms you want to keep outside. However, they do make compost bins that you can keep inside your house. You can actually buy towered compost bins that you can keep in your kitchen. I haven't experimented with that. But I personally have, I have 7 compost totes and 2 like kid pools that I made into worm bins. And I keep them outside, and they were under my rain collection tarp, because I was also collecting rainwater. I am collecting rainwater. So you can keep them in the garage, you can keep them outside. If you keep them outside, you will find that more than worms will end up coming into your bin.
That's okay.
The beautiful thing about worm bins, and why we wanted to include it into the presentation, is that it teaches. I'm a soil enthusiast, and it teaches us so much about the soil. It teaches us that the worms don't work by themselves in those bins. Microorganisms are in there with them, bacteria, and honestly, sometimes maggots and sometimes flies. But it depends. That you can combat with some extra screening, and honestly, there's a lot of stuff out there about worm bins you can find on YouTube. But and that's a beautiful thing, though, because everyone has a partner in this creation game. There's multiple partners working on that soil. So what reference can I use to choose what type goes? Oh, that's a different question. Sorry.
I want to add to the worm bin. So I tried it in my garage, and there was a lot of just like gnats that came about. So from my experience, I wouldn't put it in your garage. However, I did have a farm friend that kept her like plastic tote, as the picture we showed you guys, in her kitchen. And she put enough ratio of brown material, which would be like your leaves, your cardboard, your paper, in with her kitchen scraps, that there was never a smell, and there were never like gnats that came about. She taught me so much. Yes. So, you want to keep it, you don't want to put it out, like maybe under an awning.
Yeah, you don't want to. Yeah, that's a good point. You don't want to get them flooded with water.
Yeah, under an awning, and then feed them like once a week, and add any cardboard, any shredded paper in there, and just like create a nice mulch. Paper mulch.
Yeah, and the smaller you chop the food, if you want to chop it, you don't have to. I don't. I just throw the food in there. But if you want it faster, chop the food up smaller. And it'll biodegrade faster, and they'll eat it faster.
You start looking at your potlucks and your friend gatherings and your kitchen scraps. You see all this food, and you're like, that is soil right there. I just need to intervene right here and turn that into my garden soil, thus my vegetables that my family and my friends eat. Next question.
We'll do the last one. As a beginner, I want to plant some of my vegetables, fruits, and flowers together in one space. What reference can I use to choose what type goes with the other? I think Chas kind of went over that a little bit. I think it's a good way to take notes on each thing, on each vegetable or fruit or flower. What kind of sun, what kind of water, what kind of soil it needs. Write it down for all of them. And then you can cross-reference. You also want to think about, if you're going to put a fruit bush or a fruiting tree in one area, you want to put it on whatever side of the garden. You got to be conscious of the shade it will create for the other flowers around it. So if you're going to plant a blueberry bush and you want to plant something around the blueberry bush, but they might get shaded out a little bit, just pick something that likes the shade. Pick something that likes slightly more acidic soil, because blueberries like acidic soil.
Potatoes love blueberry bushes. They love to be planted near the blueberry bushes. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, go ahead if you have any other.
No, I think that's it.
I think you can, I honestly, like, I think that for a reference,
I'll say that Johnny's Seeds has a really good like planting guide of when each vegetable should be planted in our zone, which is zone 7B. Nicole's typing that down there. It's growing resources on Johnny's website. Prairie Moon Nursery is our native plant supplier or seed supplier, and they have really good growing recommendations on their site as well.
Baker's Creek is my favorite for unusual plants, flowers. They go all around the world to find different vegetables, and they have, you will, at your own pace, go for some stuff that's a little bit crazy because you might have trouble growing it. Just be mindful of, we're personally in zone 7, what zone you're in, know your conditions, learn your conditions, and then you'll be able to really like almost grow anything once you really start getting to know. It's just practice. Just research.
Experiments. Yeah.
I think that's it.
Do a little bit of research too on looking for companion planting. There are some books out there with companion planting in them, as well as just Googling it, you'll be able to find. And you're looking for, as Chastity said earlier, if you're looking for something that's a ground cover and you're looking for something that's a root crop, then you're looking for something that's gonna fruit from above the ground. So that's also part of your consideration of what you want to plant.
Absolutely.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you. I do want to thank everyone for inviting us and for coming and joining us. It has been a privilege to be able to speak to everyone today and to meet everyone and answer questions. We love talking about plants, and
as you can tell.
So if anybody has any other questions, you guys know how to reach us. We're Phlox Design. You can find us on all the social things. We're mostly on Instagram, but you can also email us. And we'd love to co-create spaces with you guys and relationships with everyone.
Yeah, and just grow.
Grow food. Thank you all. And we're going to turn it back over to Sydney to close us out for break.
Hi, everyone. Thanks again to Chastity and Nicole. That was such an informative presentation, and we were recording that, so we'll release that if you want to go back and collect some more knowledge. I want to remind you that our next session starts at 1:30. That is on racial equity, especially on Mississippi food systems during the pandemic. So please join us at 1:30. And if you can't, please tune in at 2:30 so that you can hear our conference wrap up. Thanks, everyone.